Hello everyone, today we talk about English Civil War flags, a short yet hopefully colorful video. So we have covered the English Civil War as far as, this kind of army organization, partly tactics, even clothes, dress. So speaking of ensigns, specifically in the 17th century, every company of regiment of foot in England carried its own flag, which was known as ensign or color, simply. And they were normally made of painted silk and measured approximately 6.5 foot square. The ensigns of a regiment commonly followed a system whereby each company could be identified by the number of regimental symbols it bore. We have seen fundamentally what companies were, what the regiment and their companies were about. These companies were fundamentally commanded respectively by a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, a sergeant major, and then a certain number of captains, usually 6. It depends. Actually, we made a video on this. That naturally, not much the number of companies, but the number of men within could change. So if you look at how they uniformed the flag system, it's fascinating because it's both between it worked the same way mostly between the royalists and the parliamentarians, right? And we have Thomas Venn describing the most common system that was not universal but fundamentally worked pretty well. Now we'll try to explain partly also why this functionalization. So, quote, "The colonel's colors in the first place is of a pure and clean color, without any mixture." And this is already not entirely true in the sense that there was some symbol, some in this still, yes, a monocolor flag that naturally had to be the most recognizable because the colonel's company was definitely the most important. And not necessarily the most active, telling the truth, but still the one around which the troops would gather, and that also bore the regimental flag, right? And but the important thing here the author is telling is that it had to be recognizable, right? This ideal that the color had to be pure and clean without any mixture of kind is obvious, most obviously carried out because of sake of recognition on the battlefield. And here we're talking about battlefields where the first volleys were shot, you couldn't see anything, right? So this thing had to be large enough, as we've seen, and clearly identifiable, especially at a longer range than the others. Then, continuing the quote, he says, "The lieutenant colonels only with St. George's arms," right? So St. George's cross, that, as we'll see, was basically present at the upper left corner of any flag except every company flag except in theory. Also in practice, as far as I understand, also one of the colonel, right? So that's a pretty, as they said at the time, a war without enemy, because it was naturally a civil war. So the Englishness, let's say, of this was present as a standard symbol of St. George's cross in both royalist and parliamentarians flags. Not all of them, right? There were also foreign regiments, for example, but or other more articulate or customized, personalized ensigns. But the standard was objectively this one, and it kind of made sense overall because naturally the symbol boosted more of the English morale. But at the same time, if you look at how these ensigns were also they were pretty standard, right? And even the deals with the uniformity or the gradual uniformation, say better, of the dress, etc., is an important thing to bear in mind. We'll talk about this, especially about cavalry later. Here we're talking about naturally infantry, regiments of foot. Then says the lieutenant's colonel with St. George's arm in the upper corner next the staff. The major's the same, but in the lower and outermost corner with a little stream blazon. So basically, the sergeant major would have normally this string blazon that I don't know if in this sense symbolized more. I don't know whether his company was kind of more dynamic on the field, had to be followed. I mean, that's the sense of it, but it's probably very, this actually English Civil War tactics were a bit more dynamic than ones of the continent. It seems, as we've seen in other videos, that the shot here prevailed, sometimes even with an important anticipation. Also, these wars were fought in, kind of tough terrain where mobility for just pikemen was sensibly reduced. So that's why the shot had this significance. So it's plausible that the sergeant major, as this senior NCO, would as in other circumstances, considering the organic and the relative officer, would take the lead, and that could symbolize the thing. But it was not always like that, as we'll see in a while. And then every captain, the rest of the captains, the rest of the companies would St. George's arms, as we've seen before, kind of standard alone though, but with so many spots or several devices as pertain to the dignity of their respective places, which actually means that there was a series of symbols in the forms of discs, diamonds, crosses, stars, so that were usually in contrasting colors, so that it could be spotted, better on the flag to recognize the company at this point that it corresponded to. So you see here we haven't pictured it. I mean, had it shown to you clearly, but it's as if you have the standard flag is a square, right? In the upper left corner you have St. George's cross. Then for the major, or it could happen also for the lieutenant, you have this blazon kind of tail going diagonally towards the bottom right, and these other symbols for the other companies were also placed on the up left bottom right diagonal axis, and they would fundamentally just indicate which one of the other companies was they identified. So as we were saying also now, a common variant of this thing was for the sergeant major's ensign to bear one of the regimental symbols instead of a stream blazon, right? So it could be, as we've seen, the lieutenant colonel could actually have the stream blazon attached to St. George's Cross, and just the sergeant major's company to have the first or the regimental symbol. It was usually one. In fact, the first captain that would have two, the second 3, the third 4, and so on. In fact, it's very easy, very elementary. Right here, maybe I haven't pictured to you visually, but it is pretty much simple. And we have, however, to bear in mind that the system described by Thomas Wendt was certainly the most common used by either side, yet there were others, right? For example, the Tower Hamlets train bands bore a central device on their red ensigns. The words Jehovah providebit, so God will provide, between silver palm leaves in 1643, and a design showing the White Tower of London in 1647. So this naturally changed over time. Also, several royalist regiments, the Duke of York's, Sir Alan Apsley's, and Sir Charles Gerrard's, being example, made use of a system whereby two colors alternating in triangular segments joined the center of the flag. Let's say that the royalists were a bit more, heterogeneous in this sense, because they naturally cared more about their, the symbolism of their houses rather than the standardized kind of state-like direction you can find in the new model army, right? It was based more on those more kind of egalitarian patterns, let's say, in this way. The number of segments in the aforementioned case indicated the seniority of the captain, 4 for the first captain, 6 for the second, 8 for the third, and so on. So basically, every company of the regiment carried its own ensign. Right, the whole regiment followed this consistent pattern, and this would have looked pretty homogeneous because it's as if they all had looked the same color. And we've seen how this was something that had been started also during the 30 Years' War. It was present normally. It's certain militias in Europe, and surely the English were influenced in turn. And it was, however, a very rational, standardizing system. It was easy. Somewhat, the sake of this was to readily identify who the units that were out there. For example, the white trained bands of the City of London had this white ensigns with red St. George's cross in the upper corner. Regimental symbol was a red diamond. The orange auxiliaries of the City of London carried orange ensigns with white plates, but in this regiment, the sergeant major's ensign was distinguished by a string blazon, not one of the regiment's symbols in this case. There is also another element that is somewhat overlooked. We talked about it here and there, but here we have a nice quote relative to the actual meaning that these colors had. I mean, they were not random. This was a war that naturally, as you know, the Civil War emerged from still a feudal reality in a way, and that surely was not fully secular modern. So all the symbolism was deeply felt, even just in moral terms, right? All these colors symbolize something specific, a certain virtue, a certain capacity. So they were intended, the colors, to relate to particular virtues valued by the colonel who chose them. And John Lucas writes in his London in Arms displayed manuscript, quote, the several complexions of military honor, in this way, quote. So it's a list of colors and attached virtues meant to symbolize, to signify. So red signifies justice, or a noble and worthy anger in the defense of religion or the oppressed, right? So the passion. And, we'll comment slightly this later. White signifies innocence of purity, of conscience, truth, and upright integrity without blemish. Yellow signifies honor or height of spirit, which, being never separate from virtue in all things, is most jealous of disgrace and may not endure the least shadow of imputation. Blue signifies faith, constance, truth, and affection, or honorable love. Green signifies good hope, or the accomplishment of holy or honorable actions. Orange signifies merit or desert, and is a foe to ingratitude. Black signifies wisdom and sobriety, together with a sincere correction and of too much ambition. Purple signifies fortitude with discretion, or a most true discharge of and trust imposed. This is fascinating because it turns out, we know in modern psychology, that it is actually true that even wearing these colors really changes your mood, changes your attitude, your behavior, right? And this must not be underestimated, naturally, in a dimension like war, where moral forces are on the fore all the time. And naturally, in terms of regimental company identity, it really meant a lot for these people who fought and died under the same color. So there was definitely a character, right, of the city. This was the standard reality in ancient times. Still in times as relatively recent as the 17th. So this is something today we barely understand, or at least we understand just in as much because we like the colors. But actually at the time it was a deeper connection, and everything was like that, right? The concept of flattening, of standardizing here is not even properly meant as we understand it in modern terms. Like these attempts of uniformation were heading towards that direction, but just for a functional purpose that still had to bear the meanings here. So Wood was in charge of literally of the colors, right, of the ensigns, where, well, it was an officer with the rank of ensign, probably the most junior of the 3 commissioned officers in a company, and he had the task of carrying the ensigns in action or parade, but probably not on the march. And you can understand why in practice, but it was still a huge honor, and naturally these individuals had a great responsibility in action, especially to not to lose the flag, right? And as that was the powerful symbol of the company and or the regiment, at least the color for both actually, and its loss was naturally the war's disgrace, like always in military history, and they were defended with all strengths. Their capture was surely not a good event, and it could actually measure pretty well the magnitude of a defeat. Speaking of cavalry, horse flags were of the small square variety with a fringe. They were 3 times smaller than the infantry ones, 2 foot by 2 foot. And each troop had one, and they seem to have had an extraordinary variety of slogans, devices, political cartoons, and so forth upon them. This is naturally connected to the fact that these were kind of a more elite troops in general, right? Independently, compared to infantry on average, and they naturally bore a bit more of that kind of characterization that cavalry had historically maintained. There is a big deal of them, and all these they're very fascinating and fun to find. I've inserted some even here. Some royalist examples. The royalists were meant to have, at least ideally, but in many instances also practically the best cavalry, right? Because they, at a certain point, they're the center of their power, mostly, on the outer England, if we can call it in this way. Whereas, the London, etc., passed the parliamentarians, and it was kind of more, I can say democratic nature, but the aristocrats maintained in the outskirts more properly a kind of a feudal system. So they were more, they fought alongside with their own peasants, things like this. And they had, however, good breeds, right? Usually they definitely knew how to fight on horseback. There is, one of these example, a trooper with a sword in one hand, and let's say a less martial instrument in the other, with the motto that translates like "ready with either weapon." Right. This is kind of the bravado in the broader, cocky attitude, literally here, and that surely was, as we'll see, we'll read some motto. There is also another green flag that is said, at least, to have been stripped from the Cavaliers at Marston Moor, that bears a pair of horns and the inscription "Cuckold we come." Right. There is also another, another, in fact, horn figure in a barrel that says, "Cuckold, get out there, you," or something like that. Dragoons had fringed guidons with 2 rounded tails, following the infantry system, but of similar size to the cavalry standards. And infantry standard colors often, but by no means always, match the regiment's coat color. That is important, naturally, because the more mobile the unit, the more important is this identification with the actual color. This, cavalry's scattering itself more than the infantry does, so much that there was, in fact, we could say more uniformity among cavalry in terms of specifically of colors. At least it seems, than infantry, where also the uniforms altogether would wear out. I mean, also the cavalry ones, but the cavalry ones were usually also better. They would maintain for a longer time, and simply the cavalry were less, so they were, in theory, easier to uniform. But this naturally had to do with lots of other things, including just material necessities. The royalists were saying before, usually they were poorer in terms of equipment. So it really depends a lot, and there are fascinating mottos that we can read from. Here's a bit of a mix actually. You could imagine the I don't know the royal standard with the quartered picture of the English lions and the French fleur de lis, and the Scottish lion and the Irish harp. There were, as we were saying, just actually a variety of other symbols. Some were properly the houses of certain lords. I don't know, Prince Rupert from Germany had properly different symbols. It was kind of diagonal cruciform flag. There was we have mottos like this in Latin that are fascinating. Vestigia nulla retrorsum, that is literally never step backward. There was virtutis comes invidia, right? So that the virtue, the excellence is the envy is the companion of virtue, of excellence, or perfectissima gubernatio, so the most perfect government. Ut cunque quadratus, that is, alluding to the fickleness of fortune. Cave adsum, you have this armored arm with a sword in the ensign. It is naturally beware I'm here. So you're pretty much done for. Or for religion, king and country, ama puissance, so according to my power. Also other broader symbols, religious ones like verbum Dei. You have the pastoral secti and headgear, and then the rosary with the cross, then Dei Gratia with the crown, various crosses as you can imagine in this context, or other mottos such as Terribilis ut aces ordinata, terrible as an army arrayed for battle, or other often French ones also from monarchy, Aimez loyauté, so love, loyalty. Then religio protestantium leges Angliae libertates parlamentorum, so the Protestants' religion, England's laws and parliamentary freedoms, liberties, saying better, and on and on. I mean, there are actually plenty, if you Google that, you can find lots of them with the ensign, so it's actually very interesting to see also to whom they belonged. Many were, these mottos, as you understand, were all also customized, and some corresponded to the old, houses, mottos that noble families and so on. So that you can find back, dating to the Middle Ages and so on. But it's basically it. We will naturally come back talking about the English Civil War that deserves definitely a lot of attention. 17th century English history, according to me, is one of the most beautiful periods to study. I had the luck of reading something about it back in the day, and it's really worth, and it deserves more attention. Also, we'll expand exactly probably at some point something more dedicated. I don't know whether a proper series, but something sure to more elaborated than this. For now, we stop it here. So I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.